Pod. Welcome back to another episode of Say Who Say Pod. He's Danny O'Neil in a sports coat. I'm Christian Caple. The college football season is finally over, Danny.
Yeah. It was exciting though. The playoffs were really good.
Yeah, it was fun. The first round blowouts feel like a very long time ago because they were. But Miami Ole Miss was awesome.
Yep.
Championship game was great. I mean, exactly what you want. Comes down to the last possession.
The Oregon-Indiana game was awesome too.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. That was one of the best games I've ever watched.
I like that, and I wrote this a little bit in my column on montlake.com on Tuesday. I like that there was a 10-3 game. I like that Oregon shut out Texas Tech. I like that there were like huge defensive play. Like, you could not show up to this playoff with an explosive offense and a so-so defense and win it.
Yep.
It was going to take an elite defense, a disciplined defense, a physical defense, which certainly Indiana has, certainly Miami has. Just great football, right? It kind of feels like the sport has reverted, not reverted, because like, who's to say that good defense is old school, right? Shouldn't good defense be a part of any iteration of college football? But if it feels like more than ever, you really got to come with a great defense to win a championship.
It felt like, and with Indiana winning it, there were sort of a fundamental pushback to two things. One, the idea that, okay, NIL has changed everything, and there's only going to be 7 teams that have a chance to win it, and it's if they have $25 million rosters. Indiana, clearly well-funded now. Mark Cuban's there in the crowd and all of that. They didn't win a national title because of their NIL, though. Like, they won it because Curt Signetti has an ungodly ability to scout talent, because a lot of these dudes he brought from James Madison turned out to be cogs in a defense that was absolutely punishing and overwhelmingly physical.
And they're
and then
old,
that second part, what's that?
They're old, too.
Yeah, that's true. They are old. The veteran experience. And then the second part of it is that the defense does matter. That it's not, for as much as the ability to physically line up and get pressure on the quarterback will neutralize any type of skill position advantage that you think you might have. The defense plays.
I don't want to put like too fine a point on that because, oh, by the way, they had the Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback who, made a little bit of difference.
Yes.
But really, really high quality of football in that championship game. Either team could have won. I believe Bill Connolly's post-game win expectancy had Indiana at like 13% or something like that. Yeah, Miami outgained them. They, when you score a touchdown on a block punt, that kind of that messes with the
that's true.
The success rate statistics and all that. It just like takes the meaning out of it a little more. But I mentioned that too. Like, Indiana just went 16-0, won a national championship. Felt like a very just juggernaut kind of team this year. Won the championship game by 6 points and scored one of their touchdowns on a block punt. If they don't block the punt, what does it look like?
Man, people will talk about, and special teams often gets lumped into that sort of, if something happens, it's fluky. There's such a thing as being good at special teams. Like, Indiana was good at special teams this year. They're really good at special teams.
There's such a thing, too, as properly serving the customer during the vehicle buying process. And you know who does that at a championship 16-0 level, Danny?
I do know who does that. Chuck Olson Kia.
Absolutely. Chuck Olson Kia in Shoreline, locally owned and operated since 1964. Family owned and operated by a family of University of Washington graduates with a friendly, low-pressure sales staff and a competitively priced selection of vehicles. We think you should go there and buy one. And if you do, you should ask for our friend Henry Olson. And if you talk to Henry, you should tell him Say Who Say Pod sent you. This episode of Say Who Say Pod also brought to you by our friends at Husky Mobile. Husky Mobile is partnered directly with the University of Washington to offer affordable phone plans for the Husky community, starting at just $20 a month, with a portion of each bill going back to help fund UW athletics. Subscribers can also enjoy game day perks like Fast Pass lanes, seat upgrades, and giveaways, all while on T-Mobile's nationwide 5G network. Visit gohuskymobile.com to make the switch today and use code ONMontlake at checkout to get a month free when transferring your number. Thanks again to Husky Mobile for supporting today's show. This point has been made by a million different people already, but I like the brand new head coach at the University of Indiana at Big Ten Media Day saying it's pretty simple. I win. Google me. And then winning a national championship in year 2 and going 16-0 it makes Babe Ruth calling his shot look like nothing in comparison.
Is it the craziest thing you've seen in college football?
Yes.
Because it is for me.
Without question.
I've gone through and thought about all of my memory of college football really begins mid-'80s, like first-person memory. I can't think of anything like it.
No, there has never been anything like it. And I know, like us in our industry, we always want to look for a comparison, but also, like, I think are too quick to call something the greatest thing ever or the worst thing ever. I don't think this is the greatest college football team ever.
No.
I think both like 2001 Miami and 2019 LSU, at least one of Pete Carroll's USC teams.
Yeah, probably throw one of those Nebraska teams in from the 90s.
91 Washington would certainly have a right to say it belongs in the conversation. I wouldn't put them quite on that tier, but I think that, like, even engaging in that debate is silly. Like, Indiana just went 16-0 for crying out loud. No, there's never been anything like it. There's never been anything like it. It would be like, gosh, is it that different than if Oregon State in the 1980s had woken up and won a national title 2 years after firing its coach after its millionth losing season in a row? And I know they had Michael Penix and they had a little bit of a resurgence under Tom Allen. They finished the 2020 season ranked. But like winning 8 games was unbelievable, was a milestone, was like, wow, what a year. Indiana won 8 games. They won double that this year.
Yeah, you go back to last season and the feeling was that was the craziest Cinderella story ever. And then the clock struck midnight and they turned into a pumpkin in the playoffs, and it was a nice story and we'll never see it. And they're back and better.
That's the craziest thing, because the way the year ended for them last year absolutely breathed all the oxygen into the idea that, like, they won 11 games because of their schedule. They won 11 games and they were the Cinderella story because look at that schedule. It broke exactly perfectly for them. They played nobody in non-conference, which that's what the system rewards now. Certainly, for what Indiana has been historically, they shouldn't be scheduling tough non-conference games. They probably should now. They had as favorable of a Big Ten schedule as you could possibly put together. They didn't play anybody till they played Ohio State late. They were clearly not in Ohio State's league physically. And then they lost Notre Dame in the playoff. And it was very easy to say, look, only 2 teams they played, they lost to. Yep. This was, certainly they're better. Clearly they're good. Nobody's saying they didn't deserve. Actually, there might have been
there were some people
saying like they didn't actually
SEC,
belong in the playoff. So to your point, I mean, to follow that up by like being noticeably better and taking a huge step to where like, oh, actually, when they play Oregon, they're going to dominate them physically. They're going to take it to other really good programs en route to a national title. Is really something else.
The strangest national title that I could remember before this was the year that Georgia Tech and Colorado shared it. And that was Colorado needed 5 downs to beat Missouri that year. And it was just one of the weird things that can be produced by the old system before there was any semblance of a playoff, when it was still, but this was, they beat everybody they played. There really isn't that much doubt. It's a pretty decisive, there's no qualifications or, they played Oregon twice. They're the only team to beat Oregon, and they kind of punished them both times. They beat Ohio State. It's impressive, man. It's really impressive what they did.
By the way, Cooper Petagna joined the show this week.
Really awesome.
Former Washington director of player personnel, now a college football and transfer portal analyst for CBS Sports and 247 Sports and that whole universe over there. Had a good conversation around transfer portal generally, some specifics on Washington's transfer portal class. Did you know that Curt Signetti has a face? And
I'm also aware that there are eyebrows attached to his face, which he will occasionally raise in ways that people find humorous.
It's to the point where, and my buddies and I would talk about this with Mike Leach, where it got to the point I would always get so irritated when people would take like, oh, Mike Leach is, oh, look at him. He's blowing on his hot coffee at a press conference. Isn't that silly? Look at him eating a banana on the field. How about, and it's like, these are just normal things that Mike Leach is doing that you're like assigning zaniness to. You don't need to. He'll do some zany things and say some zany stuff. We don't need to like make it all. And so, yeah, man, Curt Signetti has a face, and it sometimes will make certain expressions, and those expressions might be disbelief, might be curiosity, might be stoicism, however you want to describe it. But like, he's just a guy standing there with a face. We don't need to like blow up every facial expression into like, oh, Curt Signetti, isn't he just a strange old grump?
It's the difference between someone finding amusement or humor in the way someone is and being drummed over the head with how funny this is, right? Like, it's the latter part where I'm like, okay, enough. And there are certain announcers who do this more than others, who feel the need to tell me how important or how crazy something is. And now that you're saying this, I'm able to put words to it of the things that drive me crazy. Tessitore is this way. Tessitore will constantly be telling me how I should feel about something. And I'm like, no, describe what's happening. Tell me your reaction. I don't need you to like assign the greater significance to it. I can do that on my own. And Herbstreit has a little bit of that in him too, as does Fowler.
Let's talk transfer portal with Cooper Petagna. Well, as I mentioned, we are very pleased to be joined today by an old pal of the show, Cooper Petagna. Came on with us first a couple years ago. Now a college football and transfer portal analyst for CBS Sports. You might remember him better as the director of player personnel under Chris Petersen for his last 2 years at Washington. Also worked at, Oregon, Alabama, LSU. Was there a Michigan in there somewhere?
In Michigan, Cincinnati. Yeah,
Cincinnati.
Pretty
that's
good.
Right.
Pretty good recall there.
Yeah, there's just like a list. I've written about you enough times where I'm like, I think there's like a pool, like 6 schools I can reach from there. Hey, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. We're going to talk transfer portal and Washington's additions. I'm curious, first of all, just like how your role has changed since you joined the CBS 247 universe. I know when we first talked to you on the show a couple of years ago, you were pretty focused on the high school rankings there.
Yeah, it's evolved quite a bit. You know, when I got into it, my focus was really just focusing on the Gulf South in terms of recruiting rankings. And then, you know, I think after a year, I realized, hey, there's some upside here and maybe trying to get on camera a little bit more. I wasn't always keen on the writing part. I would say that muscle over time has gotten a little bit more work. And now I'm at the point where I actually enjoy it, just being able to kind of incorporate my thoughts into different articles or different patterns that you see while doing this type of work. And last year was really kind of where the pivot in my job happened, where I went from the high school side to the transfer portal side. And I had noticed that we had a significant need there. And, you know, to be brutally honest, after spending my entire career really kind of focused on the high school side and the projection, you start to get a better understanding of, you know, the success rate of a lot of these young men at 16, 17, 18 years old, how difficult it is just to pin them down, not only from a collegiate level, but to where we're doing it on the high school ranking side, projecting them to where they one day might be drafted. So for me, there was a natural attraction and a gravity to be in a space that had more information, just in terms of what was available to you, not only on the player, but the level that they have played and the exposure that you have, and everything from quality of tape to quality of competition to 1 to 2 to 3 more years of physical development. It was kind of neat for me to move on from the high school side to the collegiate side, to see the work that we had been doing on the high school side and seeing, okay, what was it that's been working? And on the flip side of that, where are we missing? So when you have somebody that is dedicated to watching collegiate film through the transfer portal. And a lot of these guys are highly touted guys that are moving around a lot. It's a really good opportunity for me, really to just kind of focus on a new frontier in a new arena. So across CBS, where I think what really helps me a lot as an evaluator is previous experience in high school, still staying connected to Andrew Ivins and his staff. Obviously, leading the front on the transfer portal side, and then dabbling really with kind of like the top 100 players in the NFL draft. So across those three frontiers, you have a pretty good scope of, okay, what is it that works? What's the demand at the collegiate level? What's the demand at the NFL level? What are things that translate? And you get a better idea of kind of what's what.
This is going to be an impossibly broad question. And also because information and the situation is changing so fast. But I'm interested in your thoughts on the relative importance for a successful college football program between high school recruiting and transfers. Like if there's a pie there, what percentage of success comes from the guys you recruit out of high school, and what percentage comes from guys you're able to get in the transfer portal?
So a lot of different ways to skin a cat, and I'll start there first because I think we'll continue to see different blueprints for success, like Indiana, right? I think Indiana, what they were able to do, and then obviously really just honing in on production. A lot of these guys, more experienced players coming from the group of 6 level guys that were with Curt Signetti at James Madison, I think has maybe probably opened evaluators' eyes in terms to how they shape a roster. Projection versus potential. And I think the other part of this puzzle is understanding the financial piece to it as well, right? Where there's not really guardrails right now in terms of where's that bucket of money coming from. Obviously you have the rev share piece, and then obviously you have the NIL side of it. So until that's a little bit more regulated, it's a really interesting question. But for me, what I would say is, me personally, my preference would be, hey, you're really building your roster probably around 65% via the high school side. And then you're complementing it through the transfer portal. And it just depends in terms of, you don't want to be overly reliable to the transfer portal in terms of finding all conference type of players or all American type of players. Really what's being happened right now in terms of the transactions in the portal is a lot of teams are just swapping kind of quality or above average starters, and that's what's happening. It's where do you find value in the type of players that might have the ceiling to grow and to develop into guys that are all conference caliber players that are maybe just kind of distressed assets, right? And that's where you can kind of manipulate it in your way, in your favor. But this year more than last year, it feels more like NFL free agency, where you're addressing one or two positional needs in terms of your expenditures. And then everything else kind of feels a little bit more like depth pieces, kind of role level players. So I think year to year, it continues to change. But if you're going to be a team that's like Indiana and Miami, if you look at the commonalities between the two, I would say the first thing that stands out is their trench play on both sides of the line of scrimmage, and the continuity that they had there. And obviously you look at Miami, their offensive line, what they're able to do. I mean, I think only one guy, Brockermeyer in the middle, is their center that they've been able to plug and play a transfer. Outside of that, those are all homegrown guys, and Nez Cooper, Francis Malinois, Samson Okunlola, Markel Bell, are all guys that, for the most part, started their career in Miami. And then for Indiana, a lot of experience and a lot of continuity, right? And a lot of guys that have played a lot of snaps together. It's hard to replicate that via the portal on offensive and defensive line. So that's kind of something that sticks out to me. I think the core foundation of line of scrimmage play really kind of starts in player development in high school.
So that very much aligns with the way Jedd Fisch has talked about building a roster, and especially building the offensive line, that, their first, and really it it's funny how closely aligned the portal plan with that position has been with the roster overall, where their first offseason, they had no choice, had to go super heavy in the portal literally to just have a roster because a ton of guys left, coaching change, it's how it goes. Last offseason, I think they took 15 guys, which also felt about right. Probably a little heavy relative to Jedd Fisch's preference. If the program's rolling and going the way he'd like it, he probably wants it to look more like this year's cycle, where I think they've taken 11. I don't know that you'll see them take more than one or two more. Two of those are a kicker and a punter, right? So you're not talking about like a ton of guys in your offensive and defensive two deeps, but they have had to go 2 cycles in a row now really heavy on the interior defensive line. In fact, that room is almost entirely turned over from last season. Could you start on the D-line and maybe as an entry point just into a overall evaluation of this group of transfers you see Washington bringing in this year?
Yeah, that's to your point, that's more of a geographical, I think, equation for Jedd Fisch in terms of finding the bigger bodies and canvassing the West Coast to be able to get what you want there, to be able to withstand a conference schedule playing in the Big Ten, where obviously line of scrimmage play is going to be accentuated. So, you talked about being able to import, guys that have played considerable amount of snaps in different levels, but why that's kind of important. So, got the list pulled up here. Kai McClendon was a guy that tore his ACL last spring, I believe, and should have a clean bill of health as he gets on campus at Washington. Was a guy that played a considerable amount of snaps at Mississippi State. And, I'll just say I'll kind of lump him in. Bigger body, experience, role-level player, serviceable body. That's what he is, depth piece, that a guy that's going to be able to contribute. Other guys on the defensive line, the kid from Sacramento State, the more that I watch him, the more that I like him, Deshaun Watts, 6'2", 318. And you watch him really against Nevada at the FBS level. And outside of that, went back, watched him against South Dakota, against some of the better competition. I mean, this guy gets where he wants to go. He's quick, he's nimble, he's explosive, he's very compact, but definitely a disruptive presence and a guy that I like a lot, probably out of the three, the one that stands out the most. And then Darren Conley, both him and Deshaun Watts, I can tell you right now, I'm a little low on both those guys. Both those guys are probably going to get a ratings bump here soon for the people out there that care about that stuff. But Darren Conley, 3 technique, good initial quickness, got to get better against the run, but a guy that can cause some disruption as a pass rushing option on the interior. So, guys that do a lot of different things. I would say Watts and McClendon are probably the most comparable, and then Conley gives you a little bit of position flex in terms of what he can do. But all guys that I would imagine add legitimate depth to Washington's defensive line.
Washington gets stung with the loss of Adam Muhammad. They go and get a running back who's from Washington, went to Oregon. How do you feel Washington's talent at running back is for next season?
Well, you probably have to remind me off the top. I can talk about, and I know it stings, like you said, Adam Muhammad is one of those guys I watched and it was like, whoa. He's a guy that I think has a really bright future, and obviously having the two-headed monster of him and Jonah Coleman last year, but I think he's a guy with more opportunity that is going to excel in a big way in Berkeley for Cal. But Jaden Lamar is a guy that I think probably the last of the Mohicans in terms of the guys that I remember from being at Washington who was on our board as like a freshman or something like that.
Yeah, 2022?
Yeah, I remember watching the tape, and he's turned out a lot better. I got to give him credit, a lot better than what I thought. And interesting running style. A guy that I think more of a zone runner, can get to the outside. Obviously has the track and field background, but plays a little bit more physical than I would have expected, just in terms of the contact balance, the ability to play through contact. But a guy that I think is going to be not just a depth piece, but a legitimate contributor in that backfield as well. So a lot to like about him. And he was a little banged up this year and missed some time at Oregon. But I think anytime that you can play the boomerang game and get a guy like him back to your home state, that's going to have a larger role than what he had at Oregon, that's always definitely a plus.
I think there's an obvious comparison, at least among the Washington fan base, to be made between Ohio State transfer Logan George and Zach Durfee, just in terms of this is a guy who didn't really have the opportunity to contribute last year at Ohio State, I think because of some injuries. So you don't really know what he looks like at the highest level. He's got crazy production at the FCS level. 19 tackles for losses a couple years ago. It seemed like Ohio State's coaching staff, I mean, just from reading like spring practice reports and stuff, early returns on him were pretty encouraging, but then he didn't really get to play at the Big Ten level. I don't know how much of him you've been able to watch. I remember him kind of being a name in the portal last year that was like, wow, like Idaho State's got a guy who's like everybody in the SEC and Big Ten wants, and look at those numbers. And okay, I'm just curious what you think of what Logan George could do at the Big Ten level.
Yeah, those guys are always intriguing when you see that jump, right? Like that's a sizable jump going from Idaho State. And you talked about the production with the 19 TFLs, and I think he had 6.5 sacks as well. And he was an intriguing one because those are the type of guys that kind of get circled in the recruiting process. And then when you rank them where you rank them, people kind of, raise their eyebrows a little bit. But certainly a guy that I can see where you make the player comparison I'm blanking on the name of the edge that was there this past year at UW, but a very active body, 6'4", 260 pounds. I think where the game probably caught up to him a little bit at the Power 4 level is probably a little bit more in the running game, just being able to hang and bang with those bigger bodies. But in terms of pass rushing upside, it's a dude that plays with a lot of activity, and I think there's more meat on the bone than what we saw in Columbus. Only played 19 snaps, but I mean, you think about the guys that they have on the edge. At Ohio State, Arbel Reese, you're talking about Caden Curry, you're talking about two of the most productive pass rushers in all of college football, right? Just in terms of what those guys are able to bring to the table. So to your point, and to the point I made earlier about talking about distressed assets and being able to find value that might be overlooked because of a downtick in production. I think that's exactly kind of what Logan George represents here as a starting caliber player who got buried on a national championship contender that ultimately is going to find his way back closer to where he started his career at Idaho State and be able to contribute in the Big Ten. And I don't think there's anything from a frame standpoint that is overly concerning. I just think we've seen this at times when guys make that jump from Group of 6 level, FCS level. That's a big adjustment just in terms of the play strength, the mass that you have to play with consistently in order to operate at a higher level.
Cooper, what'd you make of the whole Damon Williams saga?
It was shitty, excuse my language. Just in terms of, I think this is a guy that he's an ideal fit for Jetfish. He's an ideal fit for the University of Washington, how they want to play. I think his play on the field has demonstrated that. And I also understand where these guys are. It's not just Damon. It's not, it's Darian Mensah.
Mm-hmm.
These are guys that are in demand because of what they bring to their teams as a playmaker and a field general. And Damon is certainly representative of that, but in a situation, and please correct me if I'm wrong at any point here on any of these details, where he's got $4 million committed to him proactively from a program that is recruited and actively developing him, it stinks. And for him to ultimately come to the realization that it was going to be more of a headache to try to fight the current circumstance and come back to Washington. It was definitely something that was avoidable. I went to LSU. I'm from the Louisiana area. I think Damon Williams would have been a great fit in Baton Rouge. That being said, you talk to NFL scouts, they're jazzed up about this guy. Like, they love him, and they're very aware that he's 5'10". But there's teams out there that are even intrigued with the idea of that if he continues at the level that he's playing, that he can eventually be a first-round draft choice for the right team, right? It only takes one, and definitely a top 50 NFL draft choice. So, I say all that to say, you got a good thing going. You're in the right situation. You have the continuity. You have the play caller. To spurn all that for an additional, however much money more. And I don't know the details on that. You know, just, and I'm not even blaming him. It just, I've seen this situation before. It just seems preventable. And it seems like, you know, that this is something that's happening more and more and more, where it's like, you got the right fit. You're getting paid a lot of money, you know, settle down, right? Like there's the short term and the long term. And then obviously the timing of it couldn't have been any worse. But, you know, mistakes happen, and I believe in the player, what he's about and what he's capable of. And obviously he's got to go back and he's got to be able to re-earn the trust there in Seattle with his teammates and with his coaching staff. And I have all the faith that he'll be able to do that. But it's a lesson learned, not only for him, but for other players around the country as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see. You mentioned kind of NFL scouts. No bigger change in the past 15 years in the NFL than how they look at what used to be perceived as shorter quarterbacks, or guys that move around too much, where they're not as concerned about, hey, can this guy be our pocket passer for 15 years? It's like, no, can we win with him for the next 4, 5, or 6 years? You also mentioned the similarities with NFL free agency. And I've kind of been thinking about that, because one of the differences that we're seeing in college, the transfer portal, compared to the NFL, is quarterbacks very seldom change teams in the NFL in free agency. Like, it happens, Kirk Cousins or Sam Darnold. But for the most part, if a team wants to keep a quarterback, they can, for a variety of reasons, from contracts to franchise tags. Man, you look at college football, all 4 starting quarterbacks in the semifinals were guys that were transfers. And you see it. It is really incredible how that position, and maybe it's not a surprise because of how important it is, but how readily teams can achieve success with a transfer quarterback.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you get that piece right, it kind of all falls into place, right? I mean, if Indiana, this is not a shot at Indiana, but I mean, we're just talking about this on the Cover 3 podcast. Like, what does that thing look like without Fernando Mendoza right in the middle to make it go? And to your point, I think these guys are all in a situation where the money is going to be easily accessible, but they're all going to have options to play for national championship contenders while having the ability to continue to get developed. Miami's going to have a pitch, right? We developed Cam Ward. He's the number 1 pick in the draft. You know, we're a team that should have been in the playoffs. Same goes for, you know, multiple teams out there, whether it's Lane Kiffin and what he's done with Trinidad Chambliss and Jackson Dart before him, whether it's Oregon that's, you know, has the lineage of Bo Nix, Dylan Gabriel, and Dante Moore right now, be able to sign a guy like Dylan Raiola. It's fascinating to me what we're starting to see, not only with the veterans, but the younger guys, where guys like Raiola, guys like Hassan Longstreet, guys like Bryce Baker on the East Coast, all talented guys that are willing to say, you know what, I will sit an additional year to be able to get the opportunity to develop in the right spot, where I also know the ecosystem of play callers, playmakers, and protection is going to be right for me. And that's really important. So really kind of the musical chairs from the younger quarterbacks, where they're finding the right situation. Then they say, you know what, I'm going to sit, because they are slowly learning and understanding that the quickest path to the field is not always the best thing. Right. And we've seen that. I mean, we saw it with Dante Moore. We've seen it with Jackson Arnold. Dylan Raiola is, you know, at a point where he's shown glimpses of what he can be, but he also has the maturity and the understanding to say, hey, I could use a year in the right system to learn and continue to develop. So I'm with you. I think ultimately at the end of the day, I mean, you're talking about Sorsby making anywhere from 4 to 5, Levitt making anywhere from 4 to 5, Mintz's, you know, total with the buyout at the end of the day, that could be, we're talking about $10 million ultimately at the end of the day. So I think when you have the influence of the almighty dollar in the short term, and that marries with the long term possibility of saying, hey, all else equal, I'm getting paid more, I can play for a national championship contender, I'll have more exposure, and I know that at worst I'm going to have equal to player development. That's an opportunity I got to take.
Does the the free agent component in college football both ways, right? Being able to add from the portal and having to protect against it at every turn, at every second of every day for your whole roster, on top of the cap management component and college personnel departments looking so much more like NFL personnel departments. Does that make the role of general manager or player personnel director more intriguing to you when you think back to your time doing that job? Does it seem like the kind of headache that makes you think, you know what, I'm glad I'm not doing that anymore?
A little bit of both. I'm fascinated by it just in terms of, the money aspect of it. I'm not fascinated by how quickly things are changing. I mean, when you think about the NFL, you think about the quantity of players that they have to evaluate. I would imagine probably over 1,000 players comfortably in a year, right? That you have a dedicated front office, area scouts, collegiate director dedicated to. When you think about the high school side, you have about 3 years to evaluate hundreds of players, right? Maybe into the thousands, depending on what organization that you're at. This one, in terms of the transfer portal, is incredibly difficult, right? Just in terms of not knowing or understanding what the market is going to provide, because we don't know publicly how much these guys are getting paid, and we don't know the terms of their contract. When would they even be available? What does that look like? What does a buyout look like as well? So it makes it very difficult. There's a part of me, and this is really, it's not a shot at anybody, but with the Mensa situation at Duke, like, I feel for Manny Diaz, or at Washington, Damon Williams, right? It's like, and the pushback on this is like, well, he transferred from Arizona or whatever it is. But how are you supposed to know who's good at their jobs and who isn't? Just in terms of like true roster building and player development and projection, and not that anybody cares about that. The rules are the rules, or the rules are not the rules, and nobody abides by them, and they go out there and you're able to really kind of put a team together and facilitate that strictly through cash flow. But yeah, I mean, it's attractive in the standpoint that these guys are being valued now. They're being valued in ways where, we have a couple GMs being being compensated north of $1 million, and that's crazy. It's not something that I imagine happening as quick as it's happened. But at the same time, I can't imagine being in a situation like Matt Doherty and waking up one day to my quarterback just deciding on Instagram that he's going to go check the portal, and I have an ironclad contract that he just signed a week ago. I mean, it would make me rethink my life and every decision I've ever made, that I'm tied to a 19, 20-year-old that can just wake up and do whatever he wants. So I think that part sucks for all the guys out there. And, every time you talk to one of these guys, just, it's funny because you talk to the guys making a lot of money, and everybody thinks that they're living this great life, and it's like, they're miserable, most of them. So yeah, I don't know if it'd be more attractive. It's funny. I think every time I think I want to get back in, I jump on the phone, I talk to one of those guys, and then I'm good for about a year, and then I revisit the conversation. It's kind of the way I look at it.
One of my favorite stories. It was shortly after Pete Carroll went to the Seahawks, and his GM, John Schneider, whose background's entirely the NFL, they were talking about their first draft, and Schneider said he looked at him, he goes, "Look, Pete, we're going to be drafting some guys you would never recruit. Like, just so we're clear, like, we are going to draft some guys whose 40 time, like, size, weight would be non-starters for you." He goes, "Because this is a whole different deal." And for a college, like a Power 4 GM right now, it is insane the number of players you're having to consider. Like, we're talking about Logan George. You have to figure out, okay, can this guy play against a higher caliber of competition? Like, it is entirely projection based on fairly limited information. And then you throw in the component that none of this stuff is even slotted. There's no financial structure for it. Like, it is a crazy situation that college football, and not to say, oh, I feel so bad for him. It's just a crazy job right now.
Yeah, and imagine the market telling you, all right, I got 19 snaps to go off of. They're not all encouraging. And in your head, you have a figure that probably says, yeah, I'd pay this guy $300,000. And then his agent comes to you and says, hey, it's going to take 6. And none of it makes sense. It's an irrational world, where these guys live. I mean, some of the numbers that I have heard, with some of these guys that, quite honestly, it's like, it's like, hey, we're literally taking you on to fill a role as like a number 3 tight end, and you're talking about, $450,000. It's wild. And I think that's the point. You have to, like, for these guys, a lot of these guys, they have to be able to detach the way that they feel about the player personally, and the emotional part of the financial piece, and to ultimately serve the roster at the end of the day, to understand the need, that they have to address. So, certainly, I think a lot of these guys, especially the ones that come from the NFL, it's kind of a lot of bullets flying. It's very chaotic. And the teams that do the best are the teams that thrive in chaos, and, have a little bit of understanding that, like, if you try to bend the will of college football to what you think it should be, then you're never going to excel in it. You gotta find a way to kind of like understand that this is messy. And you got to be able to throw some food as well. That's just kind of the way it goes.
Last one for you, and I'll let you get going. I think we've talked about most of them, but is there anybody else in this Washington portal cycle who you'd highlight and maybe say, keep an eye on this guy?
Yeah, Colt Dieterich, big fan. Kid that's played a lot of ball, Sam Houston State. Really the one game for me is we talk about like the level of comp, but just throwing on the Texas game, and Texas got a bevy of pass rushers, whether it's Colin Simmons or Trey Moore or Lance Jackson, the younger brother of Landon Jackson. And this kid, Dieterich, is like above average athlete, but he is very, very technical. And even when he kind of loses ground initially, he does a really good job of recovering. Like he's a football player with exceptional spatial awareness, just in terms of body positioning, understanding leverage, and understanding what needs to be done play in and play out to keep the pocket clean. He doesn't wow you with anything physically, but in every area, he's very technically trained, well coached, and a guy that I think is going to be able to step in and contribute immediately as a starter for Washington. And I love the fact that he's started 12 games at both left tackle and right tackle.
Cooper, we appreciate it as always, man.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
All right, you have a good one.
It's really cool to talk to you, Cooper.
Thanks, guys.
Big thanks to Cooper for joining the show. Joins the fairly exclusive list of multi-time guest appearances, which I believe includes Tyson Alger and, gosh, has Tony Castricone been on more than once?
I only remember once with Tony.
It might be a club of 2, if I'm remembering correctly. I think I am.
I enjoy Cooper quite a bit. I like his perspective. I love his background. And I think he's got a pretty unique perspective on the sport and on Washington because of his history there.
I thought that was a very smart hire by 24/7 Sports when they brought him on, I think in 2023 or so, 2022. You've seen, like, Barton Simmons was a long time recruiting coverage guy. I forget exactly. It seems like all those guys have worked for all the recruiting companies at some point. He made the jump from recruiting coverage to personnel, working for Vanderbilt, and his good buddy Clark Lee, and obviously they're have done a great job building that roster. It is interesting to see someone go the other way, where Cooper, like we mentioned, has worked for so many high profile programs. He's got a ton of experience, a ton of different coaches. Was a big part of building, frankly, the roster that that helped Washington make it to a national championship game. There were a number of guys who signed in that 2019 and 2020 class where he was the director of player personnel that had a major hand in that run. It's interesting to talk with somebody who's now on the media side and taking a hand in the rankings and putting together the portal rankings and getting to know all these players and sort of evaluating how different programs are putting together their classes, who has sat in that seat and done it to an extent. It's also a reminder of like how much the world has changed since he was at Washington, right? Like end of 2019, beginning of 2020. The transfer portal existed, but was brand new. It was nothing like it is now. There was no NIL. Certainly there was no revenue sharing. It's a different world, but I enjoy his perspective from a scouting perspective, especially. Interesting comments on Colt Dieterich. I can't tell if the coaching staff would almost be like disappointed if Cody Green does not win that starting left tackle job. But it underscores, I think, this idea, and you saw, we talked about it a ton. It was a huge story of Washington's 2025 season, that just having two good tackles is not enough.
Yeah.
You need at least one more. And it's a tough needle to thread, right? Because if you're going out and getting a veteran, do you really want to be selling like, hey, if all goes according to plan, we've got our starters, but we really need a good backup and we'd love to have you. And I don't think that's how they sold it to him. They probably told him, hey, you come here and compete. We don't guarantee jobs to anybody. You come, and if you're the best guy, you'll start, but we do have this 5-star coming in we really like, and we're going to give him every opportunity to win the job too. Hard to keep depth around, hard to keep talent around. Easier probably on the offensive line than any other position, but you've seen the progression at tackle for them, where in 2024 it's like, get two bodies in here who can play. And they were fortunate to already have Drew Azzopardi as a transfer coming in. In 2025, it was like, okay, go get a starter from the portal. Carver Willis, great, plug and play. Carver Willis and Drew Azzopardi got two tackles, but one of them goes down. You got to rearrange some deck chairs, so you're not at a huge deficit there. 2025, you feel like you probably have two starter caliber tackles you're working with, and now it's, you got to go get a third to compete with one of those guys and give you a viable backup should something happen to one of your starters. So to me, it's an indication of just the overall health of the O-line room is in a lot better place, and that, they learned from what their deficiencies were last year.
And just the general building of depth, right? You do it two ways. You're building it internally with high school recruits that then develop, and being willing to augment from the transfer portal when the option comes up, and they've needed to do that. And as time goes on, hopefully you have to do that less and less, but it does give you the opportunity to sort of try to fix it in two different and complementary ways. They're not necessarily working against each other.
Did you see Max McCree signed with Wazoo?
I did. I was happy to see that. I definitely root for Max, and I thought that he did a pretty admirable job in tough circumstances when in his first year at UW, somebody who had not played football the year before and some of the situations he was thrown into. I'm excited. I think that should be a really good opportunity for him at Wazoo. And I think the Cougs, compared to where it looked early in the year, and you kind of warned everybody about this, of like, look, there have been autopsies conducted on Cougar football before. Like, let's not affix the toe tag just yet. This isn't the loss in North Texas might not be the death knell that everybody says it is. You can feel pretty good about where things are headed now.
Yeah, I saw their looks like their starting quarterback is going to be Caden Pinnock. You saw at Husky Stadium this year playing for UC Davis. Went on to have a good year at UC Davis. We'll see how he makes the jump to the FBS level. I saw he got his truck lease.
Yes.
Joins the pretty, I'm not dead serious when I say this, pretty illustrious company of Wazoo quarterbacks who have received a truck lease from that dealership in Cam Ward and John Mateer. So that's, if he can play like those guys. I don't know if Zevi Zevi got the truck last year or not. Probably not, because he didn't start the year as the starter for some reason.
Yeah, for the weird whatever they were doing at quarterback the first month of the season. That was probably in retrospect the most puzzling thing that happened.
Maybe that was why because
he didn't have the truck release. They needed the clarity that comes with the truck lease.
Yeah, they're like, look, if we're gonna give out a lease, it's got to be an ironclad starter, and we're just not sure about this crew. So let's wait till week 3 to play the right guy.
I think it was Stephen Godfrey and Bomani Jones a couple weeks ago. They were talking about that one of the trickle down effects of NIL is that the Dodge Charger market has taken a hit in SEC towns, because it used to be like the Dodge Charger was the go-to endorsement incentive offered to players, and now it's just straight cash. That the Dodge Charger market has really taken a hit. I like the fact that it's staying strong on the Palouse with the truck lease.
Isaiah Thomas drove a Dodge Charger when he was at UW, I believe.
It's a mean looking car, man. Those are mean looking cars.
I think he had some purple treatment on it. It was like UW themed. Ian has an interesting question this week.
He does. Our question, conversation, it's worth a conversation with IP McFarland.
Morning, guys. Good national title game, I guess, right? Like, I was rooting for Indiana. I wasn't going to be heartbroken if they lost, but I was certainly happy for my friends at Home Field Apparel. Got some pretty blissful texts last night. Fun story. There's still somewhat of the Cinderella. The few texts the three of us exchanged pointed to a little Indiana fatigue, which they're going to be at home against Ohio State on October 17th. I believe that's their only scheduled Big Ten game. They're likely going to be 5-0, having won, 21 in a row and 33 of the last 35. Yeah, I think people are going to be pretty well tired of them at that point. Signetti, the meme that is Signetti, won't be quite so charming. But let's fast forward with them a little bit. Let's pretend it's like the end of 27. They've been through 4 years of Signetti. They've won a title. They've likely been to another playoff, let's say 3 or 4 years in that stretch. They've been well moneyed for a really long time. I mean, like, not necessarily from an NIL standpoint, but they've been under the Big Ten contract for a long time, and doing so with, I believe, the lowest expenses up until very recently in the conference. So they got dough. My question, what program do we comp them to? Meaning, if you look at the fan base, you look at the coach, the style of play, whatever. Like, what is the college football internet and the talking heads like? What program parallels them? Because the upstart element, the rapid turnaround, that's gone. That's over. That's no more. So what are they now? How do we look at Indiana, and how do we look at them relative to the rest of the landscape? I hope you guys have a good week. Welcome to the off season. When this comes out, it'll be 219 days till next season. Go Dogs.
So, I mean, the easy answer is there is no comparison. There's no comparison for the turnaround, certainly.
No.
If they're here and they're here to stay, and not here to stay as like a perennial national champion, but as a team that, on an annual basis, nobody will be surprised if Indiana wins 10 games and is in the playoff type of team. I mean, I don't know. Are they like juiced up Iowa? As far as the fan support is there, the community's behind them. They have such a huge alumni base. That's the thing.
They have a very big alumni base.
So, where Iowa's a program where you'd be pretty shocked if they ever have a losing season. They also don't compete for championships. They don't compete for playoff appearances. I think, one or two close results go differently this year. They're in the conversation. So yeah, are they maybe a little, they're Iowa with the roof off?
Where does Oregon fit into? Because Oregon would be the comparison in the sense that a team that was an afterthought or considered sort of that their ceiling was good when they got to a bowl game in the 80s and then have emerged over, but it was an extended period of time. It took like 10, 15, 20 years before they're now at a position where like regularly expected, they are expected each year to contend for a playoff berth. I would say that's fair for them at this point.
Yeah.
But it's a different style of play entirely. Like Oregon, I would say Oregon has been all about speed. Like that is the signature of the rise of their program, is the speed they play at. And Indiana, I think the signature these past 2 years is how freaking physical they are. Here would be the other thing I would insert, though. We don't know how this is going to pan out because all indications are that Curt Signetti has an extremely good eye for talent based on the fact that he took a lot of players from his former job and have turned out that those guys could play at a really high level in the Big Ten, right? Like he's got an eye for talent and for identifying that, but they're also older. Is he going to continue to recruit that same type of player? And those guys are going to play 4 and 5 years of college football. I think you have to wait and see like how is he able to maintain it before we start. Hey, this is a team that you're going to pencil in every year as one of the top 4 teams in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, I think expectations are pretty high for Josh Hoover coming in from TCU, and it's funny how like Fernando became like, well, how are you going to replicate Fernando Mendoza? Well, what did people think Fernando Mendoza was coming from Cal? I really liked him. We watched him out here. We were familiar with him. I liked him at Cal. By the way, go back and watch his post-game interview from Cal beating Stanford his last year there. That's vintage Fernando. People aren't as familiar with that one. You gotta get to the Big Ten platform before. I probably made that. I'm probably repeating myself, but the Indiana Oregon comparison is, and like, look, there's not going to be an apples to apples straight across comparison because it's college football and no two programs are the same. But I do think there's a fit. Like Oregon's skill talent over the years probably obscured like how physical they were.
Mm-hmm.
Like they had some pretty badass offensive lines through 100%. All those Chip Kelly years. And I think Dan Lanning has really made that a staple of his program. It's what makes like Indiana's trenches so impressive, was how much they dominated some programs that themselves pride themselves on being physical. It is different, like you mentioned, kind of from the roster building perspective. Like Oregon should expect to recruit at a top 5 level every year, or at least close to it from the high school ranks. I don't know that Indiana is going to be that kind of program. Their 2026 class was ranked like in the 30s, but we know what they can do through the portal. Their portal class is extremely impressive. Evidence of perhaps the financial backing that they're enjoying. Did you see Curt Signetti say like, it's like, just so everyone knows, like we're not spending as much in NIL as some of you are talking about or suggesting, which like, yeah, they're probably not, like I was listening to the College Football Inquirer podcast with Andy Staples and Stephen Godfrey and Ross Dellinger. And I think they put it at like, they said, look, it's not like a top 5, maybe top 10, but also maybe not. Like they might be in that $22 to $25 million range that is probably around where Washington is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think they will spend more in 2026. I think Mark Cuban has made clear that he is more involved than he ever has been. And it's not just him, right? We tell you like 800 some thousand alumni. Like they have a billionaire and an enormous fan base that's more invested than it's ever been. I mean, they're just in an awesome place as far as support goes. So, you know, I suppose there is some Oregon to it, where, you know, Oregon's program post mid 90s looks very, very, very different than it did before then. Maybe this is Indiana's, you know, mid 90s right now. It's just so accelerated because they won a national title in year 2 of trying.
Yes.
Like, it's wild. What kind of program would they be going forward? I mean, I feel like Iowa with the roof off is probably, because they've already shown like they're so much more capable than a lot of programs you would compare them to of putting it all together. But they've only done it once. That's the thing. I mean, you know, stuff lines up sometimes for a miracle season, and, you know, they didn't win in miraculous fashion. They won because they were better than everybody. But can you be that much better than everybody again? And, you know, I think if they're back in the playoff next year, you know, I wouldn't focus too much on what the ultimate result is and how far they get. If they're back in the playoff next year, it's going to be real hard to say that like Indiana's going away anytime soon.
Yeah, I'm going to go with blue collar Oregon. If you're Iowa with the roof off, I'm blue collar Oregon. Is what I think Indiana can do. And the one qualifier I would offer on that is that having resources in professional sports has never been a guarantee of success. A lot of times, and especially in sort of uncapped sports, it can be a prerequisite, but there are tons of examples of teams over the years that have spent and tried to spend their way to a title and not done it. So being well-resourced isn't a guarantee of anything. There are more examples of people who have blown fortunes trying to chase a national title or a championship, as opposed to people who have won that championship by spending a fortune.
I see, now the more I think about it, I feel like Iowa with the roof off is underselling them because they're paying their coach $12 million.
Yeah.
Like, that's so they're in, regardless of their NIL situation, which I think is quite healthy and probably will become more so. They're in such like rare air just with what they've invested in their head coach.
That part of it is what is truly unprecedented about them is that they've experienced this rise, and it does not appear that their coach is interested in going anywhere. Because the normal coaching progression is that at this point, Signetti would leave, right? At this point, he would do what Cape and DeBoer did, and no one would blame him for it because he's trying to shoot. And it very much appears that he's already said he doesn't want to coach in the NFL. Like, I decided a long time ago I'm a college coach, and the contracts he signed point to the fact that he doesn't want to coach at another college.
And it's not just that, like, he's not leaving Indiana after 2 years for something better. It's that the circumstances are such where it would be crazy if he did. He'd be nuts to leave Indiana. Like, what would you be leaving for?
Well, but let's take it, because Jimmy Johnson, when he was at the University of Miami, had a similar setup, and he left for the Cowboys, right? Like, left for a different, like, usually there is some ambition, like coaches that are on this, they usually don't get to a school that's like Indiana, or is even just say mid-table of one of the best conferences in the country, and decide, like, okay, this is where I want to stay. Like, usually there's some, not just financially, but sort of the ambition of, like, let's see how big an operation I can run.
Yeah, but I guess I just mean, like, if the NFL doesn't move you, if we're acknowledging that, like, that's just not, you know, at 64, I'm not trying to parlay, like, this run here at Indiana into a pro job, which he's made clear he's not. I'm always just fascinated by, like, the very small handful of college coaches who NFL teams identify as, like, being worth the risk. What did they see? What is it that they saw in Matt Rule, or, you know, Urban Meyer's probably a little more self-explanatory, but, what is it about this particular college coach that you feel like will work in the NFL, and why not like all these other really successful guys who maybe they're not interested themselves, but who, you'd be surprised if ever got a shot in the NFL?
It usually involves the owner. Like because usually involves the owner developing a huge crush and deciding, I'm going to give this guy this much power. Like that's usually the path of, there's not, and they are, as professions, they are very different skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
An NFL coach and a college coach are very different skill sets. There is an element of politics that a college coach has to deal with that an NFL coach does not. There is an element of catering to teenagers, recruiting, that college coaches depend on that NFL coaches do not. And there is an element of being able to work the margins that an NFL coach has to deal with that college coaches do not. College coaches can always say, go out and get better talent. For NFL coaches, there are certain mechanisms that govern the amount of talent or work against having a talent advantage. You have to know how to do more with the same. So I think for that answer, if you're asking someone who is a career NFL GM to like that, those are the reasons they're less likely to identify a college coach. Rule's an interesting example because one of the things that Rule did was run a very consciously like pro NFL style offense in college. Like he was even doing it when he was at Baylor. So there was a level, the play translated, but ultimately, like when a college coach ends up going to the NFL, it's usually because the owner becomes smitten and says, all right, let's give this guy the world.
The way too early rankings consensus on Washington seems to be about in the 18 to 20 range.
Yeah, I saw that.
About 6th or 7th in the Big Ten, which shows you what they're up against in that league. That you can be considered the 20th best team in the country and potentially not even in the upper third of your conference, but they will. It's a tough schedule. You look at ESPN's way too early top 25. Washington plays 5 teams in it, and Penn State is the fifth best team on that list, just going off of the ranking. Indiana, Oregon, Michigan, USC, all ranked, or excuse me, Iowa, USC. They don't play Michigan. They do play Iowa. Iowa and USC, all ranked ahead of them, and then ESPN had Penn State 22nd. So when you first looked at this 2026 schedule, it kind of seemed like, all right, this will be the most manageable yet in year 3. By the way, it'll be announced on next Tuesday, January 27th at about 2:30 p.m. The Big Ten announced that it will be making its announcement, scheduled its schedule release. It always kind of seemed like Penn State was the marquee game, right? The big, like, I mean, I remember, I think I wrote before last year, like looking ahead at the 2026 schedule, it's like, oh, they're hosting, they hosted Michigan in 2024 coming off a national championship, Ohio State in 2025 coming off a national championship. Who knows? They could be hosting defending national champion Penn State in 2026 if they put it together and have the kind of year everyone thinks they will. They were the preseason number 2 team in the AP poll. They were the preseason Big Ten favorite. And yes, Washington is hosting the defending national champion in 2026, but it's Indiana. And Penn State is, I don't want to say an afterthought because Penn State's never an afterthought when you have to play them and you're Washington, but yeah, they might be the 5th best team on Washington's schedule.
It is. This would be the part that I really like about Washington's move to the Big Ten, because I like looking at a schedule with those kind of games. I think it's fun and challenging. Like it's a good schedule. And I don't get so into the how does it break down for them to win a national championship or get to the playoffs so much as it's going to be a fun year. And I feel genuinely optimistic for Washington. I'm excited for it. And I think that where they are in the rankings is perfect in the sense that you're not so buried out of sight, out of mind, that a run of success isn't enough to get you into sort of the mention, like they're more than within striking distance. I think it's great. I'm excited for this year.
It's a 4 conference home game year for them with 3 non-conference. Their season openers, the Apple Cup, which will be fun. Their home games are Indiana, Penn State, Iowa, and Minnesota. Minnesota's the only in that group that probably won't be in the preseason top 25, and they won 8 games this year. So, not really. It's a game that, look, man, if you're a top 20 team in the Big Ten, you better expect to beat Minnesota at home, but not a gimme. 7 of their Big Ten opponents had winning records overall this year. Got to play Nebraska, which did win 7 games, replacing a quarterback. It's in Lincoln, right? Tough place to play. You got to play at USC, coming off a 9-win season. You'd like to think they could win at Purdue.
Game. I think you got a chance to drive the nail in the coffin on Lincoln.
You think so? We'll have to see where it falls.
I think you've got a chance to be get this guy out of here, which I would love. I would absolutely love that.
I mentioned this. You think there's any chance Indiana gets a bye before coming out to Seattle? You think they'd make them? You think they'd make them play a game before making the trip to Seattle?
We should keep an eye on that, because if there was a general understanding that Washington got rogered by last year's schedule, it should be reflected this year. There shouldn't be quite so many. There shouldn't be quite so many teams coming off of byes and Washington playing on short weeks after traveling across the country. I saw Mick Cronin was out complaining about Big Ten scheduling again. Good luck, sucker.
No.
Yeah.
Not Mick.
Yeah.
It'll speak volumes about, like, that might be part of our answer of what is Indiana going forward. Is did they get the Big Ten blue blood premier brand treatment where, like, all right, we're making you play out Washington, but don't worry, you'll get a week off before. Like, you won't have to play a game the week before. Is this okay, coach? All right, you're good. Indiana, we got to take care of our brands,
I would say this, though. Signetti doesn't strike me as the whiny pants kind of guy. Although
No.
he did complain about the personal fouls.
Well, he had a legitimate gripe on a couple of those.
You know what, though? This is the part of, like, there is a bloodthirsty part of me as a football fan. I kind of feel if the quarterback is pulling out a fake, that he's kind of fair game to get blasted.
Yeah, I mean, you're part of the play still.
If you're doing that,
But
I kind of think it's fair game, and I know it's not really, but there's a part of me that feels that way.
if you're going to launch and lead with the crown and hit up under the chin,
probably could have done it a little less viciously, but there's part of me that's like, you're pulling off the fake, you're free game, buddy.
That's the show. We hope you enjoyed the 2025 college football season.
I enjoyed it.
Won't be talking about any games next week, but we'll be talking about something, damn it.
Well, schedule, apparently.
Yes. We'll know when Washington's games will be. Of course, 1 or 2 of them could still end up on a Friday, I assume. So it's not like final, and don't worry, we still won't know what time any of them are.
Yeah.
But we'll know what weekends they'll be played. So we'll talk to you next week.
Peace.